So COVID is still very much there, as we saw in that report. And joining us now on NDTV is Dr. Soumya Swaminathan, the Chief Scientist at the World Health Organization. Dr. Swaminathan, thank you for joining us. We can see that not only have cases in Delhi, for example, been rising recently, but what's worrying is that hospitalizations have gone up 60% in the month of August alone. Doctors in Delhi are saying they've discovered a new sub-variant of Omicron here called BA2.75. What can you tell us about this subvariant?
Thank you. Nidhi, pleasure to be back. So as we've seen the Omicron variant over the last several months develop several new mutations and evolve. There are many sub-lineages, many branches of the Omicron lineage that we've been seeing since January of this year. Globally, we see there's something called BA.5 actually that's predominant, almost 70% or so, and particularly in North America and Europe, and BA.4. But as you said, in India and in about 15 to 20 other countries, the BA.2 has further evolved, and we have the BA2.75 and also 2.74, 2.76. All these numbers basically indicate a group of different mutations, a combination of mutations. And by studying the mutations, now scientists have a fairly good idea of what each of these variants is doing. So BA2.75 certainly has evolved to become even more efficient at transmitting itself. It's able to evade the immune responses that people have. Now, you mentioned Delhi, and I read that the people who are hospitalized in Delhi, the numbers are still low, even though they've gone up a little bit in the last few weeks. Many of them have received the 2 doses of the vaccine, but not the 3rd dose, the precautionary dose or the booster dose, as we call it. And this is important for people to understand that a 3rd dose is actually needed to get a strong and durable immune response against Omicron, but also against other variants that are circulating or that could evolve. So it's really important, especially for vulnerable people, to get that 3rd dose if they have not done so.
Ma'am, but we're also seeing a number of COVID reinfections this time amongst people, even amongst people who've got the booster. Now, is that something that's to be expected?
Again, unfortunately, when these vaccines were first developed, it looked as though they had high level of protection, not only against severe disease, but also infection. Now, as the virus has evolved, as I mentioned, it has learned to escape the antibodies in the blood and is able to cause infection. But thanks to vaccination, the T-cell immunity or the cell-mediated immune responses are protecting us from getting severely ill. And that's why we have seen that even when the number of infections go up significantly, the number of people who need to be in ICU or who are dying from the disease has significantly reduced. So the protection against severe disease is maintained even against the new variants, even against BA2.75. But to get the best protection, that 3rd dose is important.
Right, ma'am, but there's also the question of having a second booster shot, which is what some other countries around the world are already offering. And this is particularly in light of concerns for the elderly and for those who are vulnerable. Now, India doesn't have this policy yet, but do you think it should?
There are probably a few groups of people who need that additional shot. The majority of the population will not. 3 doses will be sufficient. But there are people with very weak immunity, particularly the elderly, also those who have underlying immunosuppressing conditions and those who've been on drugs, for example, that suppress the immune system. And there are people born with congenital immune deficiencies. Such people may need a 4th dose, people of different ages and the very elderly. There isn't a lot of evidence actually that a 4th dose really is needed for long-term protection. What's been seen is that a 4th dose, does result in a rise in antibodies. That's expected, but it's a temporary increase. And after a few weeks, it goes down again. So I think what we're really more worried about is the long-term protection against severe disease. And that there's very little difference between 3 and 4 doses, except, in those small groups of people I just mentioned.
Right. Ma'am, last question. We have the announcement just recently that Moderna is coming out with a new vaccine that will target Omicron and its variants. So is that going to be the breakthrough for future vaccines now? Are there more such vaccines that are coming? And we've already heard Adar Poonawalla saying that he's working on one.
There are many companies that are working on Omicron variant adapted boosters, both in mRNA and other types of vaccines. There are also about 10 nasal vaccines and about 5 oral vaccines that are in clinical stages of trial. So very interesting to wait and see the results of those, because it's possible that if you have nasally administered vaccines, that you are generating mucosal immunity. And in addition, with a injectable vaccine, perhaps that kind of mixed response would be better. Ultimately, I think the goal is to have immune responses against COVID, which are both broad and long-lasting, because we don't know what the next variant is going to be. And if you're making variant-adapted vaccines based on previous variants, it takes about 6 months to develop it. We'll always be playing catch-up. So the goal should be for future vaccine development is to add as many different antigens as possible. So have multi-antigens, add antigens beyond the spike protein, and try to look for different routes of administration like mucosal or intradermal that might actually give us, a better and broader immune response. Ultimately, of course, what scientists would like to do is to develop what they call a pan-coronavirus vaccine, which will be broadly protective against all the variants, but also other types of SARS-CoV viruses.
Well, that's the vaccine that I think we'll all be waiting for. Dr. Soumya Swaminathan, thanks very much for joining us and giving us some idea about what we're dealing with as far as this wave of COVID is concerned. Thank you.